Hello, Kyle.
Kyle.
I'm
Charles.
Nice
Charles.
to meet you. Welcome in. Glad you could make it. Go ahead and
Right on.
take a seat for me right here.
Oh, most definitely, sir.
So how are things? You find your way here all right?
Yeah, good old, you know how it is.
Everything going well? Enjoying the spring weather?
Spring weather, gotta love this weather in Milwaukee. I swear to God, it's awfully amazing.
Definitely, right? You know, when you have such brutal winters, you gotta appreciate every little bit of warmth you can get, man.
Right on. And you know, hate to say I gotta take these beautiful shades off, but I'm getting a little bit old, so I gotta get my reading glasses for this one.
Totally couldn't understand more the things that time does to us.
I know, right? So you know, I had to get a little bit prepared, so I got some notes here as well.
Glad to see that.
But yeah, this is a beautiful office you got here.
Thank you.
Beautiful
Appreciate that. I appreciate you bringing some notes as well. I guess that brings us to things. If we could get to things, I guess. What brings you into my office today?
Well, you know, last couple of weeks has been a little bit rough for me.
Sorry to hear that.
A little bit. Hopefully things will be a little bit better. You know, I had a little incident. Well, it's like I got a client calling me. Let me just
Sure thing.
turn this off real quick. My bad. Sorry, I work for Salesforce, so everything lately has been absolutely crazy with the deals and sales. But I ran into a little situation. I was having, you know, New Year's Eve, hanging out with the buddies. You know, we're in Chicago getting some beers, and you know, I said, you know what, things are a little bit cheaper. I didn't want to get a hotel in Chicago because it's really expensive down there. So I said, you know, let me just go to Milwaukee, book a hotel. So I had the rental car in Chicago. Me and the buddies hanging out, and then we just, you know. It was getting late, New Year's Eve, you know how it is, it's already past midnight. So I said, you know what, let me just head back up to Milwaukee. I should just, you know, get some sleep. And on the way there, honestly, everything was going smooth. I was on the interstate, perfect. I got off the interstate, and I was going down 27th eastbound on Wisconsin, and I don't know what happened, honestly. Everything's a little bit hazy for me, and I was only 2 drinks. I wasn't like, you know, going too crazy or anything, but I was going this, you know, 40 miles per hour. At least that's, you know, what they said. I definitely think I was going, you know, reasonably even lower than that. And I was going down the street, and then, you know, just somehow my car hit a parked car. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
My vision's a little bit hazy, but like I said, I really wasn't drinking that much that night. I'm a big heavy drinker. I always hang out with my clients with Salesforce, and I'm always, you know, putting down a lot of drinks, but that night, I only did like 2, so I mean, I don't know really what happened, but.
Gotcha. Okay. Understood. So it seems that you're here for a OWI. Were you charged on that day?
Well, I was charged.
You were?
Yeah, so, you know, the police officer, so there was no other witnesses besides there was a passenger in my vehicle.
Okay.
But there was a Walgreens clerk, you know, apparently just called up and pretty much said, you know, they heard a car accident. I don't know why they did that. It wasn't really that big of a deal. It was, you know, they could have buffed out the car. It really wasn't that much of a big deal. And pretty much, where was I? Oh, the Walgreens employee called. The police showed up. I was trying to tell him, like, it was not much of a big deal. Everything's fine. But he was pretty adamant. And then at that point, I was a little bit shooken up, you know. So I asked the officer, hey, can I just sit on the curb a little bit so I could get my breath a little bit. By no means was I drunk at all, but, you know, I got on the curb, and then the police, for some reason, did the test for me, like for a sobriety test. And I was kind of confused by that part, but I said, you know what, I don't want to be, I'll just be nice, you know. So I ran the test. He wanted me to do the ABCs. I thought I did absolutely, you know, perfect, you know. Apparently he said I stopped at K. There's no way I stopped at K. I'm 100% sure I cleared all that. He also said, you know, do the face touch nose test.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I did even amazing on that, but he said I didn't even touch my nose, which I don't know.
Right.
And then lastly, that part a little bit hazy on the last part. Oh, he made me do the straight line test.
Okay.
And at that point, I was still kind of shaken up from the accident. Like I said, it wasn't much of a big accident, but I was still a little bit shooken up. So I told the officer I couldn't do it, and then he thought that was good enough to, actually no, he was kind enough. He called the ambulance. I'll give him that. He called the ambulance. So I went to the hospital. The hospital ran some tests, and then after that point, they said they were trying to say I had a bipolar episode, which
I see.
that's insane. I've never had anything, no such thing that before, so absolutely crazy for them to even suggest that. They did say, something about my blood alcohol level being pretty high, but I don't think it was too much of an issue. And then at that point, they arrested me, and I got booked. They gave me an, OWI to the second degree, and they gave me some bail conditions, and that's really why I came here today, because some of those conditions is really make me nervous.
Okay.
They're saying that absolutely no sobriety, which is going to be really tough for me because I always have to make these pitches and sales, and we're always going to bars, and you can't just be that one guy that doesn't have a beer with with the client. They're going to think I'm a square or something. I absolutely can't have that happen, especially my reputation right now. Everything's going so good. And then the other thing was pay $1,000. What to me, $1,000, nothing. And then the last thing is, what was it? Oh, they said I couldn't travel out of the state. And for me, that's like the biggest thing. I need to travel. Like, absolutely, like that's so crucial to my job. I have to meet these clients. I have to go to these places. And for me not to get out of the state, they're trying to keep me captive here. Like, this is absolutely insane. And that's pretty much what happened. I was able to pay the $1,000. I'm out on bail now, but that's what I really came here for today. Is hopefully you can help me get out of the situation because I really, really need to be able to travel. That's like top priority for me.
Okay. I think we can help you with this. First of all, I just want to say I'm sorry to hear that this happened to you.
Yeah.
Obviously, an OWI charge is something that no one wants to run into. And so before we get into sort of the legal side of things, I just want to ask how you're feeling about this. I'm sure there's a lot of stigma that comes with this. If anyone had reached out, if anything with work had happened, and just kind of how you're feeling about this happening to you to this point, and make sure that, or get a sense of how you feel about things.
Honestly,
More on a personal level than a legal level.
like how I've been feeling lately.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's kind of tough. Just like every day is like weighing on my brain that I can't travel out of the state. Like I'm a lot older. I'm 44 now. Like I'm not getting any younger.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like this, I don't want to like lose my job. Like if I lose my job right now, especially like I've been in sales for over 20 years. Like I remember when I first sale when I was at 24. Sales is my thing, and as you know with sales, like it's so crucial that you got to meet clients, meet people, and socialize.
Mm-hmm.
And with this, with this charge of OWI, I won't be able to do this, which is, it's been my life so far. So like, it's been weighing on me, I've been doing the best I can. Here some days gets a little bit darker than the other ones, but that's why I came for you today, because I heard so many great reviews from some of my buddies. So
Awesome. I'm glad that you heard a good reference. I'm sure that we'll be able to help you take care of this. It sounds like your main concern is really get to work then, as far as just the non-legal concerns and making sure you maintain your job with sales going forward.
I do have another issue that I didn't tell you before.
Okay.
So earlier, I want to see how much you can help me on this particular situation. Earlier in the car, there was somebody else in the vehicle.
Okay.
There was a young lady. Now, in terms of how the circumstances with the young lady, I met her at the bar, and I was thinking to myself, I saw her, she was a young girl.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a very old guy, but I saw she was a young girl, and I saw she was with some other guy, and this other guy was like really like I saw her like slap her and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like I just couldn't stop myself. Like I had to I wanted to console her and like let her know like everything's gonna be okay. And I told her like, let's go to my hotel and like so you can get away from the situation. So, and that was back in Chicago, and we got in the car, and she was with me in the car. She's the only other person that was the witness to this accident. The one issue is that they were trying to say that she was a child, and I didn't know anything about that. I was just trying to get her away from that situation because I saw this guy literally just braid her at the bar, and like I mentioned earlier, like I was trying to be a good person. So as she did break her arm, but then she alleged that I paid her, paid her for the night. If you catch my drift.
Sure. Okay. I see. Almost. We don't have to name it, but
Yeah.
I understand what you're getting at.
The assistant DA said he told me that he's going to be pressing charges against me and possibly federal charges.
Okay.
So I know this kind of sprung on you for a little bit, but
Sure,
this is
this is an aspect to it that we can definitely discuss. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, first of all. We'll get into a little bit more detail as to the events that went down that night. But for now, before we get into that, do you think we could just run through a really quick service agreement just to make sure that there's mainly just a point of contact between us after today?
most definitely.
Okay, wonderful.
I get my glasses on because you know I get any younger.
So this is just a basic credit card authorization form. It basically just says that we here at the firm have the ability to basically access your card, and you can read through it. If there's anything you need help with explaining as far as anything that's on that form, I'd be happy to. But that's not saying that you owe us any money right now. It's just mainly, as I said, a point of contact for us. Once you run through things a little bit and we kind of get a plan of action going forward, as you said, you have a court date, I'm sure, for the OWI charge and something with this minor woman. So we'll get things in order for that a little bit further along in the conversation. But this is just to kind of get things rolling as we get going.
And you want me to complete this right now?
Yeah, if you don't mind. You
Perfect.
just some basic information you can scribble in. You don't even have to fill it all the way out if you don't feel like
No, that's perfect.
you know everything that's asked for it.
One thing about me, money is not an issue for me, so
Okay.
we're gonna be perfect on this one. One question, you said the
Sure thing.
name of the purchaser?
So if this was basically if you were representing a business, but we
Oh,
don't
okay,
have to worry
yeah,
about that.
perfect.
We can just skip down and get
Alright.
to the name basically. That's all I'm looking for.
Appreciate that.
Of course.
Actually, I absolutely love his pens.
Oh, thank you.
Kyle Breeze. And today's date to the 14th.
Yes, sir. So
Perfect.
while you're just going through that, there's one thing I wanted to mention before we kind of get into the events that happened on the date this all took place, is that there is something, I'm not sure if you're aware of, called attorney-client privilege, which basically just means that whatever's said between us, if you decide to retain me as your counsel, I will be bound by law to secrecy, essentially, for you as your representation. So-
Perfect.
Right.
That's absolutely,
So-
because this whole thing with like the girl has been absolutely making me, I'm gonna be honest earlier, I did, kind of fib a little bit, like kind of, not lie, but I was trying to withhold that part about the girl, because
Sure.
that's been the one thing, like, I can't, like, I got a wife, like,
Okay.
I can't, like,
Can't have that get
I
out.
can't, yeah, I can't.
Okay.
She would actually kill me, so like,
Understood,
that's,
sir. Definitely. So
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to make sure I got that on the forefront before we got through some of the details. Just that you and I are on that same wavelength and understanding that whatever it is you have to tell me here today, I will make sure that it stays a secret. Anything that to that nature, like you said, you have a wife that doesn't need to know about this. All those kind of details are helpful for me, so I can represent you as best possible as you see fit. So
that makes me feel so much better, like,
wonderful.
you don't even realize it takes a little bit less of my stress off, this is making me feel better.
Okay, awesome, Kyle. Well, then in that case, now that we've got some of the preliminary why we're here out of the way, let's, I guess, jump into what happened on the date in question. But before you do it, I just want to kind of let you know what I'm looking for. Basically, just the chronology of the events, as many details as you can recall would be beneficial. Nothing insignificant. Everything that you can remember could be helpful. And wherever the story starts to you, you said this was on New Year's Eve.
Yes, New Year's Eve.
You can start there, and then if you don't mind, I'll just be jotting down a few notes as you go through that, and we'll go from there. I might jump in for a few different little questions, but largely just try to recall as much on that date as you can.
Perfect. So, as mentioned earlier, it was New Year's Eve, and me and my buddies were, just hanging out. What other better day to hang out with the buddies than, New Year's Eve? So we went to a bar in Chicago. I don't remember the bar's name. We were kind of bar hopping at that point. Only had 2 drinks throughout the whole night. And then, as mentioned earlier, I saw this girl get, smacked up by some guy. I'm not gonna know what happened in that situation, but just knowing she was getting berated. So something in me told me that I should go console her and just try to keep her protected from this guy. So I told her, let's go meet up back at the hotel so he can get you away from the situation. Drove down, took the interstates. Then we got all the way to around Milwaukee. I was on 27th Street. I was going eastbound on 27th Street in Wisconsin. And then I was going about 40 miles per hour. And then I was driving. Somehow, it's all still the hazy, like not entirely clear, but I was driving, and next thing I know, I hit a parked car on the probably like the right side of the street. And then at that point, I was kind of standing around. I was still stood in the car. I will say I didn't have my seatbelt on, so that was definitely, I had my seatbelt on, but the airbags did deploy. So at that point, I was kind of shooken up from the crash, and then as the police officer came, he told me, I don't exactly remember everything the police officer told me, but at that point, I said to the officer, like, hey, can I get out of the car? Because, I'm a little bit shaken up from everything. And can I go sit in the curb? He's like, yeah, that's perfectly fine. At that point, our interactions were, pretty good. And then I go sit in the curb. I'm trying to, process everything that had just happened. I'll also give you some kind of context with myself. I've had a prior charge with OWI before.
Okay.
This was about 12 years ago, 2013. I was stationed out in Florida by NASA, so I always forgot the area it's called. Cape Canaveral, that's what it is, Cape Canaveral. Stationed out over there, and I was, I think I mentioned I was in the military, that's why I was over there. I got the charge for OWI. I still don't remember how I got that charge that day, but I had to go to court. Luckily, I only had to do counseling with my priest, and that counted enough. And that was about it with that prior charge. But that was like 12 years ago.
Okay.
So then going back to where we were before, so back in the car, I was sitting on the curb. At that point, the police officer, for some reason, wanted to run a test on me for a sobriety test, presumably. As I mentioned, 2 drinks. I felt pretty confident that in the test. So I said, sure, I'll take the test. Earlier, I did the ABCs. I think the officer must have been lying because, in my opinion, I was pretty sure I completed the whole ABCs fine. After that point, he asked about doing like a a face and nose test. I thought I cleared that as well. The officer said that I didn't. He said I touched my face, but I didn't actually touch my nose when directed to. And then at that point, I was so shaken up from the car crash. When he asked me to do the straight line test, I told him that I couldn't do that. At which point, he called the ambulance, went to the hospital. They ran tests. They did say I had like a blood alcohol level of 0.24, which don't entirely know the significance of all that, but it was
Okay.
0.24. At which point the doctor recommended me to get a psych eval because he's saying he thought I had a bipolar episode. I mean, as I mentioned to you right now, I told the doctor everything that happened to me that night, and for some reason he thought I needed a psych eval, which I thought was absolutely insane. At which point, I thought it was clear. I thought everything was done, and nope. The police officer came up, grabbed me, and took me to the jail. At which point, I was charged with OWI to the second. The bail conditions were $1,000, as well as absolute sobriety, which is going to be difficult for me in my sales. And then the other condition, let me take a little sip real quick. Try to recollect on the other one. So absolute sobriety. Oh, no travel.
No travel.
That was the last condition. And then that's really what stressed me out a lot. And then at which point, as of now, I'm out on bail. And these are just, and then after that point, that's when the assistant DA reached out to me, mentioning about the girl and how she was apparently 14 years old. She was allegedly human trafficked. And she alleged that I paid her $25 to have relations with her for the night. I'm not going to go anymore. I think you kind of catch my drift on that part. I deny that because that's not what happened that night, but that's what the DA said, an assistant DA. And then he also further said that it's possibly going to be federal charges against me. So that's really what's scaring me is those federal charges, because, yeah.
Okay, yeah, of course. That's reasonably a scary thing to hear from any district attorney. So thank you for that. Get a quick sip as well. So one thing that I just missed out on as I was trying to get some things down.
Mm-hmm.
Once the police detained you, and you said they put you in jail that night for OWI, before you started listing off the conditions, what was it that, I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you were mentioning about, what the timeline was between what happened once you got into the jail. How long were you there?
I did write down some notes as well, so let me double
Okay.
check. From my recollection, I don't remember the exact time I was in the jail.
If you can't, that's not a problem. It's a minor insignificant detail. I just want to make sure that I got as much part of that story as I can.
Yeah, so that part is a little bit hazy.
No worries.
I don't remember exactly how long I was in the jail.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember the kind of like the rushing of like, hey,
Right.
you hospital, police officer arresting you. Next thing you know, bail. Like it was all kind of like one big blur.
For sure. Okay, not a problem. So then I'm gonna ask just a few more questions, just to kind of try to get more of a sense of that story, try to close in some gaps. So as we get through the story, you mentioned a couple times that there were only 2 drinks.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to re-emphasize the fact that I can keep anything you tell me confidential, and sort of reaffirm that that is the case. If there was more than 2 drinks, that's perfectly fine. I don't think it'll affect our defense too much. I just want to make sure that that is the case. Is 2 drinks throughout the night?
I'm almost 98% sure there was 2 drinks that
Okay.
night. Now, I will admit my memory is hazy, and you know, for me, when I start drinking, some nights it gets a little bit hazy. So, is it possible that I had more drinks that night? Possibly,
Okay,
but I'm pretty certain it was 2 drinks that night.
fair enough. Thank you for that. So, are you a resident of Milwaukee?
Not necessarily resident in Milwaukee. No,
Do you live in the state?
no.
Okay. So you were at a bar in Chicago, in a hotel in Milwaukee on New Year's Eve.
Yes. Oh, and the reason for that was because to save money. Like
Save
it's
money, right, yeah.
honestly like the crazy difference in prices. Chicago is about like $300 a night, and I know I mentioned earlier, you know, money's not a problem, but you know, you also gotta save a little bit. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
So hotels in Milwaukee is always great, and you know the food scene is a little bit better in Milwaukee too. Don't tell anybody my buddies in Chicago.
Okay,
But,
sounds good. I'll keep that confidential as well. So you're in Chicago for the night. You guys were doing some bar hopping,
Yeah.
trying to celebrate the New Year's Eve. When you made your way into a bar and saw a girl being berated by someone who ended up, in hindsight, potentially being her human trafficker. So one thing I do want to mention is that there is, with the affirmative, some sort of, I don't know if it's the right terminology, there isn't a defense that it sounds like could be available to this minor human trafficked 14-year-old. But we don't have to jump on that just yet. I just want to confirm that you met this woman in the bar.
Yes.
So can you walk me through what that looked like? From the time you saw her in this bar to the time that you ended up able to leave the bar with her.
Yes. So I was sitting at the bar. Don't remember the bar name. It's that night we were going to different places, different bars. So
Do you remember a street potentially or a neighborhood?
We were definitely we're in the West Loop.
Okay.
Hanging out in the West Loop. I don't remember the bar name because we were just jumping different places. It was a new bar. It was pretty cool.
Newer bar?
At newer bar. At that point, me and Buddy sit in the bar, and then I see at the corner of my eye, I see this girl, and the next thing I know, I see this guy go like that, and I was like, whoa! Like I was like, that's crazy. I've never seen anybody just like smack a girl like that, like in public, like absolutely insane. At that point, for me, like I couldn't just sit there and allow this behavior to happen. So I went up to the girl. At that point, the guy had left. He disappeared somewhere. And I consulted the girl and said, like, this should not happen to you. You should not be taking that kind of abuse. Mm-hmm. And I told her, I have a hotel in Milwaukee. Let's try to get you away from this circumstance. And then at that point, she agreed. And then I got into my car. And then we just started heading back to the hotel. This was still the New Year's Eve. It hadn't technically been the new day, so it was 31st. So at that point, it was probably like 11:29 at that point. And then along with that, me and my buddies were bar hopping since like 5 p.m., like about 4 p.m. So we're like, I had the 2 drinks, but I was tired at that point. Like 6 hours bar hopping, you know how it goes.
Sure.
So we go in the car, and then what was the other detail that you wanted?
That was basically it.
Okay.
So I'm gonna probe just a little bit more on that circumstance. So you make your way in the bar, you see this woman getting abused by a large man, and then you walk up to them, you ask to get her away from this situation. Was there any resistance by the gentleman she was with?
At that point, he disappeared. By the time I walked up, he walked away.
Okay, understood. And then you recommended that you take her back to Milwaukee and stay in the hotel room with you. In between all of that, was there anything said by this woman? She just complied, she agreed to
Yeah, she
get
complied.
away?
She was crying, so like at that point, she was like not in the best emotional state at that point.
Right.
She didn't say many words, but she definitely nodded. Like I remember
Okay.
nodding. And at that point, I just felt bad for her. So for me, like this whole circumstance of her saying that I paid her for the night, and and she's 14 and everything, like weighs heavy on my mind because that's
Sure.
That's not the type of person I am.
So I know that you said that you don't recall the bar name, but I am going to probe just a few questions about the bar specifically, just so that maybe we could pinpoint where you guys were at if it becomes a necessary detail. Do you recall what the bar looked like on the inside? Just maybe a general description? Maybe like the colors on the walls? Was it more of a sports bar type?
Definitely more a sports bar type.
Okay, sports bar type. You said it was newer, which definitely helps a lot.
Newer one.
Awesome. One of the main things they'll ask, if you remember it all, is if there was anything in relation to being carded to get entry into this bar. Did you have to show an ID to any bouncers on the way in, if you recall?
It's a great question. Presumably I don't remember quite clearly.
Okay, fair enough.
But I'm pretty sure because the bar before we went to that we got carded, so I think at that point we probably did get carded.
Okay, probably got carded.
Yeah.
and I don't expect too much more detail if you can't quite remember that, but do you recall any sort of wristbands or stamps that were given entry into that bar that indicated or didn't whether you were or weren't of legal drinking age?
It was kind of late at that point.
Okay, no problem. We can just keep moving on.
Yeah.
I don't think that that'll come up. So you take this girl back from the bar, and then you guys are making your way back to Milwaukee from Chicago. Was there any other stops made in between the last bar, and on the way to Milwaukee?
No, it was a straight shot.
Okay. So was there anything else that happened in between the car or during the car ride that needs to be mentioned?
No, but actually, you just brought up one thing that I forgot to mention. When the police searched my vehicle initially, they found a pot pipe in the trunk,
Okay.
and it was now everything's starting to come a little bit more clear now. It was the car I was driving was a 2023 Ford Fusion. It did have 23,000 miles on it. Unfortunately, it did get totaled. At least that's what they said. And that vehicle it was my wife's.
Okay.
So it was kind of, yeah, she's pretty still mad about that one. But they said that they found a pot pipe in the trunk. That's something that I do not partake in that. But
Would you say it's fair to say that was likely your wife's?
could be. I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay. So you guys are making your way back from Chicago to Milwaukee with this woman in the car, and it was your wife's Ford Fusion, and it happened to be totaled when you were, I believe you said, eastbound on 27th in Wisconsin, in your memory about 40 miles per hour when you hit a car on the right side of the street. If we could you maybe just draw me a quick diagram of what the street looked like, where you were heading? So if this was 27th, and you said, is this a two-way or a one-way street?
Oh, 27th Street. Oh, yeah, it was a two-way street.
Two-way street,
Yeah.
okay. So we got people going down both directions. And you were coming eastbound, and you seem to have hit a parked car on the right-hand side of
Correct.
the street, something similar to this?
Yep, this is exactly.
Okay, understood. Just like that.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. So, sorry about that.
Nope.
Thank you for that visual. Visuals always help. So at that point, you don't recall what happened, but you end up hitting this car on the right. You had your seatbelt on, the airbags deployed. Was there anything that happened between the actual crash and the officers arriving on the scene?
Not as I mentioned earlier, my memory for that was a little bit hazy.
Okay.
But in terms of that, nothing really. Allegedly, the officer said it was a Walgreens clerk heard that accident, but didn't actually see the accident. And then, of course, the girl was in the car. She broke her arm from the accident, but she's the only one that actually saw the accident. But that's the only details that she told the DA. She didn't actually say like any further details about the actual accident itself. Oh, you're good.
And when you say the girl told the DA, that's in relation to the 14-year-old girl, not the
Correct, 14-year-old girl.
Gotcha, thank you. Okay, thank you for that so far. So one thing I want to mention, you said that you had a prior OWI charge about 12 years ago in Florida when you were enrolled in the military.
Yeah.
Luckily here in Wisconsin, we have something called the counting rule, which says that if it's been 10 years since your last DWI, DUI, or OWI charge, it essentially resets your clock. So you'll go back to your first offense in most cases. I'm not entirely sure if that also bleeds over to DWI charges that are outside of the state, but that's definitely something that I can look into and get back to you on. But
Perfect.
I want to put that in your head. That could be something that lessens the penalties here, for sure. But getting into that, as we continue along, the officer shows up, and You said that he ran a field sobriety test, that you consented, you agreed to it?
I did
You thought
agree
you'd be
to
okay?
it because I felt, like I said earlier, I felt very confident. I didn't think I was intoxicated at all. So, and at that point, the officer was very cordial at that point.
Mhm.
But then, I don't know, he just seemed like when he started doing the test, he just seemed like kind of like a jerk.
Okay.
And I didn't understand why, but it is what it is with the aspects. I'm very certain that I passed that test, and I felt like the officer kind of embellished this field sobriety test. But
Okay.
that's just in my opinion.
And when that field sobriety test was going on, were there any other witnesses to you taking the test?
If anything, it would have been the girl,
The girl? Okay.
but outside of that, no other witnesses.
Understood. Okay, thank you for that. So, in regards to that test, he had you do your ADC's test, and he claims that you failed to do that. Further, he said that you claimed to not follow all aspects of his face touch aspect of the
Correct.
test. And then after that, he asked you to walk in a straight line, to which you declined.
Correct. At that, as mentioned earlier, I was just shaky from the car
Yeah,
accident.
totally, for sure. So after that point, during the test, was there anything that happened between that and the point at which the ambulance arrived, which the police called, that that you can remember being of importance?
He told me to sit down, and he said he called the ambulance for me. Because at that point, the girl was saying her arm was bothering her, so, but and I didn't mind because I was like, you can always never be too overcautious going to the hospital.
Of course.
Because I just got in the accident, so, and I was so shooken up, so I didn't know concussions or anything, so I was like, you know what, better safe than sorry. I didn't think it was any issue. I was very compliant with that, so I just sat down and waited. Then I got into the ambulance, and then from there on, I mentioned earlier, we ran the test and all that stuff.
Okay. And one last thing in regards to the crash. You said that this Walgreens clerk was the only one that claimed to have heard the accident. So
Yes.
to your knowledge, there's no other witnesses of the actual crash itself.
No other ones, besides the girl, but yeah.
Okay. So when the police came and filed their police report, who did they get the details of the event from? Was it you or was it the Walgreens clerk? Or potentially someone else?
Oh, with the accident,
Yeah.
I would probably presume it was, because I told him my story, I was going down eastbound Wisconsin, and then, somehow the car hit the parked car.
Mhm.
I think more of the details probably came from that Walgreens clerk,
Okay.
presumably. And yeah, that's about that.
Okay. So even just a little further along the timeline, the ambulance shows up, and do you and the girl go in the same ambulance to the hospital?
It's just me.
Just you. Okay. At what point did you realize that she had a broken arm, or how were you two separated from that point?
At that point, like I mentioned, everything's still kind of hazy, shaky on that. So I just remember getting into the ambulance, but I don't remember seeing the girl there. But then I found out that she had a broken arm from the DA.
Okay. So the girl did not get in the ambulance with you?
No.
So, in regards to the female that you were in the car with, was there any conversation between you two in that point from Chicago to when the accident occurred? I don't mean this part to sound insensitive, but she's, as has come out, she's been human trafficked. Was there any indication that she, spoke good English? Was there any indication that she might have been someone that was in fear for herself, I guess is the best way of putting it?
She was just very, crying. So her eyes were still bloodshot, and I wanted to respected that, so I didn't want to pry into too many questions. I think I asked her if she wanted any food or McDonald's or anything, and she said no, and that was about the extent of that. I didn't want to be too encroach, ask too many questions. So outside of that, no, we didn't have much conversation.
Not much conversation. Okay. So you get to the hospital. at which point the ambulance, or excuse me, the hospital does some tests and evaluations on you, and they find a .24 blood alcohol content. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Actually, I wrote it down, so let me double check, but I'm 100% sure. Oh, let me see. Correct. Yep. .24.
Okay. And at that point, presumably because of that number, the doctor recommended a psychological evaluation. That's correct?
He recommended. He didn't actually perform or anything. He told me to get a psych eval. I said no, because I'm not bipolar by no means. So yeah, that was the extent of that conversation with the doctor in terms of the psych eval. I said hell no.
Okay. At which point the police detained you and you guys went to jail after you registered the blood alcohol level?
Yes, after the hospital. So once I got released from the hospital, they got me.
Gotcha. So, in regards to, excuse me, just a moment. In regards to your mind state that night, I've heard you say a couple times now there was only a couple drinks, but that it was a long night. That you started from 5, and then these events occurred at 11:30. I don't mean this to come off as insensitive, and I want you to remember that anything that you tell me, I can maintain confidentiality in. In your opinion, in your prior experiences with alcohol, would you have considered yourself drunk that night?
I'm just so certain that night I had 2. There's always possibilities, but I think that night I was pretty solid at 2.
Okay.
You know, my mindset that night is New Year's Eve. You know, I've had a family member prior that's gotten into an accident on New Year's Eve, so that always kind of weighs unconscious on my brain every night. So for me, it's a very big deal for me, like New Year's Eve, to not go crazy.
Okay.
But is it outside the realm that I had possibly more that night? Could be. I think that's like a 1% chance I have it. I won't close the door on that one, but I'm very certain I had 2 drinks that night.
Understood, and thank you for your honesty with me. So is there anything else that you think needs to be mentioned before we move on from the timeline of events? Anything else in regards to chronology of the story, any other events that you think we should be talking about?
Truly. I think I covered all the key details. And I'm just going to look at my little notes because I want to make sure. I wrote down before I came here all the story and everything.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure. You know, personally, I was not injured, but the airbags were deployed. The car was totaled. My seatbelt was on. Let's see. The police officers were the ones that called the ambulance. They found the pop pipe in the trunk of my car. Apparently, the girl that I was with that night, she was allegedly missing as well as earlier alleged to be human trafficked, but she was alleged missing. Psych eval. We got charged with OWI to the second, and then I think I hit all the key points. For the original charge in Florida, it was 2013, so 12 years ago.
Okay.
At that point, I was about 32. To get out of that, I just had to do counseling with my priest, and then there was no jail time served at all. And I think mostly for me, the biggest thing is I'm required for my job to have dinners and cocktails weekly with all my clients. And I think it's going to be really difficult with these bail conditions to continue to be absolute sober and have no drinks and also maintain my job.
Right. So one of the things that I know you mentioned is that you were very concerned about was the no travel because of your job and your need to travel outside of the state.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it relates to the ability to travel outside of the state per se. However, I do know that in regards to these OWI charges, that oftentimes that you can request for an occupational license.
I do not have them.
Right. So there's usually a window in which we can request one for you,
Okay.
which basically states that you would have to comply by these bail conditions outside of using a vehicle for necessary purposes like getting to and from work, dropping off your kids at school if you had to,
Mhm.
things of that nature. As I said, same with before, I'm not quite sure if that entails being able to travel interstate, but that's something that I can check back in and
Okay.
get back to you on. But that is one way that we can provide some relief to that concern of yours. So that's something that we'll definitely look into. In order to get that happening, there's usually a period of confinement before you can essentially use the occupational license. I believe for first offense is usually not any window period, but you generally have to provide some sort of proof of like financial responsibility. This is basically an insurance form. So we can proceed with that
Okay.
if necessary. It sounds like it might be.
Yes.
And try to get you settled and sorted out through that occupational license to make sure that you have that ability to continue your travel for work.
Perfect.
Um,
Absolutely. That would help relieve some of the stress I've been having.
Okay,
Just
wonderful.
to be able to travel.
So I'm glad that might be able to alleviate some of that. But in relation to what you've been charged with, so what did the DA tell you exactly what the crime or the charge was
No, he said the federal charges is gonna be relating to the girl.
relating to the girl?
But that's the extent of it. He said it would be federal charges, and it'll just be related to the child.
Okay,
And that was it.
understood.
I don't know what those charges could be, but definitely something that's been weighing heavy on my conscience.
Okay. Well, that's something that we can definitely look into as well a little bit later down the process. So we'll look into the occupational license. As far as the charges that you might be being faced with, it seems like the one from the DA might be a little bit up in the air if we don't know exactly what you might be coming at us with. However, it does seem pretty evident that you are faced with this OWI charge. So
that's like probably the main issue at point right now.
okay, is that the main issue for why you wanted to retain my services today?
Yes.
Okay. So we can jump into that then. In regards to the OWI charge, one thing I want to make sure of. You're saying that you were charged with OWI to the second.
Correct.
To the second. Okay. I'm a little unfamiliar with the terminology of to the second. Did he explain anything in regards to what the charge was called?
Double check real quick. Let me see. Telling you, this age is killing
To
me.
the second, meaning it's your second offense. I think I just cleared that up myself. My apologies, sir. I think what OWI to the second indicates that it would be your second OWI because it's your
The prior.
prior. Right. Okay. But because of the counting law, from my understanding, we should be resetting the clock. So I believe that you're on your first OWI charge in the state of Wisconsin. As I said, I'll get back to you on the specifics of that just to make sure that I do have that correct. But that might be one other thing that we can consider is that it might technically be OWI first offense,
Okay.
which is
I know it's not a certain, but that.
not a certain, but it could definitely be a positive for us. With that, I want to let you know that typically comes with a fine or a forfeiture of around $150 to $300, just as like processing fees.
Okay.
Usually no confinement sentence, no jail time needed for that charge. However, typically a 6 to 9 month revocation of your driver's license. However, as mentioned before, we can try to get you that occupational license to get you still on the roads for your work purposes.
Okay.
So in regards to the minor in the car, actually before we jump to that, would it be fair to say, or to ask, if you know how you would like to plead in regards to the OWI?
Presumably not guilty, so I don't have to, because I for me, like, if I plead guilty, then there's a chance that I won't be able to travel out of state. So that's something I try to get this as much as possible, not like get this charge to go away.
Okay. One thing that I do want to mention is there are potential escalators with an OWI if your blood alcohol content reaches certain thresholds. And I do believe at a 0.24 that we could be in the realm of reaching those certain thresholds.
Okay.
So that while we are still on our first offense, we still could be facing more serious penalties, even with it being our first offense in the state, because of where your blood alcohol content was registered on that day. So I want to advise you that you definitely have the option to plead not guilty, but I want to let you know what some of those penalties could be for these escalators. So let me look at this very quickly. So, right, anywhere between, we're at 0.24, between 0.2 and 0.249 is essentially doubled consequences for most of these offenses. So that would mean that likely we're looking at the floor and the maximum of all these being doubled. That being said, does that change the way you see to pleading not guilty? I understand that you still have this concern with being able to travel out of state, and not that pleading not guilty is a bad option at all, because we could still proceed to trial, we could still gather witnesses. The problem I see is that there was none, right? So having a court battle between our word against the cops is typically a losing fight. I just want to put that out there, right? It's going to be hard to fight a case with little evidence on our side.
Mm-hmm.
However, if we do choose to plead not guilty, that still leaves us the opportunity for some sort of plea bargain with the DA and lead up to the trials, which I want to, also put that on the table, put that in your head.
So in terms of pleading guilty, it will still like in some aspects kind of like help like at that point would I would be able to still do a plea bargain or like?
So pleading guilty would be you're essentially accepting the terms of what the judge lays out for you. You would accept liability. The benefit oftentimes in pleading guilty and not making the court run through the process of proving your guilt is it can at times make your sentences and your fines lessened, right?
Okay.
It tends to get some empathy from the judge, not making the district attorney go through the motions for something that from their side they see as a closed deal case, right? Strict liability in most cases. However, this is entirely your decision. I would advise you what I think the options are, but at the end of the day, it'll be up to you, and this is something we can revisit in a separate meeting. But I just wanted to get the options out there on the table and kind of get a sense for what you wanted to do going forward.
And thank you. I think with that aspect, so I'm gonna have to process that. I always sleep on that.
Sure thing.
If you don't mind, I do also have some questions for you as well.
Please, yes.
I know. I probably should have asked this a little bit earlier, but in terms of like, how many of these criminal cases have you covered so far in your career?
So specifically with OWI cases, it's not something that I myself handle a lot in this firm. We have a few different partners and they shuffle around. I definitely have had my hands on helping it with a few handfuls, but myself personally, it's something that I'm familiar with, but I will admit I'm not an entire expert on the matter.
Okay. And then in terms of the this more not this OWI but it's criminal law, what kind of percentage of your practice is criminal law, and like how long you've been in practice?
Okay, so for myself, I'm still relatively recently a new graduate, so my own experience is again relatively new.
Okay.
But the firm that I have the privilege of being hired by, we have a very knowledgeable and wide array of attorneys at our disposal. So anytime that I do have some shortcoming or misunderstanding of the law, as your representation, I just want to reaffirm to you that I have a plethora of minds to fall back on, more advice to seek out, and that even where I might not have full clarity on a situation, by retaining our services, you're not only hiring me, but the entire team behind me that can assist you and I in this situation going forward.
All right, so that makes me, it's the whole team, okay, that makes me, makes me feel better. I think you already mentioned earlier some of the issues that you probably like see with my case right now, like, and I know you're gonna try your best to make these charges go away, but from your legal advice, is there any way to have any chance to like settle out of court with these charges?
So I think there is some potential for settling out of court. If we decide to plead not guilty and go forward with the OWI charge, I think that there's a reasonable expectation that there could minimize these penalties for you, because it is, he said, she said, with not really a ton of outside witness evidence to prepare at the trial. There's not going to be essentially a ton for the jury and the judge to go off of. And so that gives us some more leeway as far as making deals with the district attorney. So I won't give you any guarantees, because I can't guarantee that the district attorney is going to be in a good mood that day, right? But given the facts of our case, there's definitely the potential, and I wouldn't close the door on it.
And what kind of with this case, because I know you mentioned the occupational license, how long do you think that would actually take, that kind of duration?
So because this is your first offense, assuming that the county law applies outside of the state, it shouldn't be very long at all. As far as I'm aware, the period of revoking essentially your license with the occupational, if you are granted the occupational license, shouldn't be long at all.
Okay.
However, like I said, I'd follow up with you to let you know if you can travel out of state.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, in regards to your charges with the district attorney and the minor 14-year-old, it does present some complications, because we don't know exactly the charge that the district attorney is coming at you with.
Yeah.
Whether it's sexual exploitation of a child, child trafficking, enticement, what have you. Not knowing what the exact charge is as your representation does make it a little bit tougher to try to foresee what potential defenses could be. However, one thing that tends to be a running theme with these child trafficking or enticement laws is a reasonable defense that if you had any reason to believe that she was not underage prior to what went down, that could be an offense, but that burden would be left on us to try to prove that we did not know that she was a minor, which is why I sort of asked some of the questions about whether you got carded at the bar or if there was any sort of stamps. Or
it makes sense, yeah. And earlier you were concerned about me taking offense. By no means was I taking offense.
Okay, well,
This,
thank you. I'm
this
glad.
for me was kind of this, the whole night, this is a huge haze, and it's more for me frustration, because that would be crucial to my case.
And from what you explained to me, it does seem that you were genuine in trying to help this girl out, right? And if you were truly not aware that she was under the age of 18 prior to this, if she expressed a want to leave the bar with you, I think there's a reasonable expectation that there could be discharge either thrown out or lessened. But as I said earlier, not knowing the exact charge does give me some pause before giving you any direct advice on that matter. I think that's something we might just have to put a pin on and wait until we hear more from the district attorney.
Okay. But what am I, kind of going off of, like, because of some of the questions I have, like, what's going to happen to my job if I get, charged with OWI? That's,
So that's may remain to be seen, and might depend upon your boss, your work. However,
Okay.
the fact, I guess this might be an important question. Is there any sort of commercial driver's license that are involved with your work? Do you have to maintain a CDL, or is that in any way involved with what you do on a day-to-day?
No, so I'm just like a sales engineer. So I just go around, because right now, like as I mentioned earlier, Salesforce. So I go around just selling, pretty much the product of Salesforce to different people, different clients, different vendors. It's mostly like to keep things a little bit not as complicated. It's not like a traditional sales job. We don't really. I have not applied for an occupational license.
Okay.
And I don't don't know if I necessarily fall within that category.
Okay, that's good.
Within sales, but I've heard some murmurs from some people. It's possible, but other than that, I don't entirely know. I'm kind of oblivious to the aspects.
So I can't give you any legal protections as far as what your work is or isn't obligated or allowed to do with your employment. Assuming that you're an at-will employee, like most are in this country, that remains to be seen. However, hearing that you're not required to use any sort of commercial driver's license for your job, that definitely bodes well for this OWI charge. You're not the first, and you certainly won't be the last that's faced with an OWI charge. So, I mean, it's not unheard of to get some sympathy from your work, especially that you won't legally be prohibited from carrying out your job, seeing that you don't have to use a CDL, because that would be the only legal repercussion where they would prevent you from carrying on with that. Assuming the occupational license carries over state to state, you shouldn't have too many issues. One thing I want to say though is that potentially maybe you could work something out that with your job while you are, if you are prohibited within the state of Wisconsin, that maybe you just kind of man the jurisdiction of Wisconsin for your sales force while you have to serve, or at least face these penalties for the OWI. That would be something that I could recommend to you.
Well, the one thing is, when you're referring to a commercial driver's license, is that the same thing as like a regular driver's license?
No, it's not. So it's usually for like bigger trucks, 18-wheelers,
Yeah.
buses, things of that nature, where driving is an actual part of the job you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if that's not the case, it definitely bodes better for your situation.
Yeah. So yeah, they don't have us with like a CDL or anything.
Okay, that's
just
good.
regular driver's license, but travel is important for me
Definitely.
to make those meetings. Let me see. You already mentioned one of my questions was about possible charges about having the girl in my car. You already mentioned earlier it could be an array of different things, and
Right.
so kind of like only had two more questions. So the next question is either the assistant DA mentioned about this. What I'm mentioning about is the girl. He said it was going to be federal charges. Now,
Right.
what is the difference? What happens if the charges about the girl are federal versus state?
So I believe that it will be a state charge. I think what he's alluding to is that there might be felony charges. Honestly, I'm not too entirely sure on the exact differences, but that's also something I can brush back up and get back to you on.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely something
Okay.
I'll reach back out to you on. That's a bit novel for my situation, and I will re-educate myself and get back to you on that for sure.
Perfect. And then my last question is, what's the next steps? So from after this meeting,
So you mentioned that you'd like to sleep on whether making the decision about how you'd like to proceed.
correct.
Typically, at this point with the OWI, having been charged, arrested, the next steps would be to decide whether you want to plead guilty or not, and then we would proceed to a pretrial conference. At that point, we can discuss whether there's some sort of potential plea between us and the district, or whether we're going to have to prepare for a trial, at which case we would gather evidence, try to prepare witnesses if we could, which could be a bit of a hurdle in this situation, and get ready for the court date, essentially, at which point the judge and the jury will hear evidence from both sides and determine your innocence, essentially.
Perfect.
So at this point, the next step would be to essentially just get some of your information down, set up a next meeting, and then sort of sleep on the decision of how you'd like to plead in this matter.
Perfect.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case and you'd like to retain me as your counsel, we can go through this services agreement and schedule a next meeting.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, wonderful, Kyle. Thanks for coming in tonight. So one thing that we can do, and I can run you through any of this if you have any questions.
Most definitely.
This is just our services agreement for any criminal defense. This agreement will be made on the day of the 2025, excuse me, between our firm and yourself, Kyle, in Wisconsin County. Basically, what this states is that our attorney, as your attorney, I do not, excuse me, I do not agree to undertake other legal representation of you. It's basically one matter at a time. So if you'd like to retain me for your other
The federal charges?
federal charges with the district attorney. We can fill out another one of these when you come
Perfect.
back in and discuss how we're going to proceed with the OWI.
Perfect.
Also, this just mentions that the client will also be discharged if the above charge is compromised or disposed of. So essentially, once this OWI charge is taken care of, we'd need another service agreement if you'd like to retain me as your service going forward.
Perfect.
These are some of the fee agreements. These aren't too pertinent for us at the moment because we don't know how we're going to plead.
Mhm.
But this is another important provision that basically just says that as a client, you understand that as your attorney, I make no guarantees about the process and what will play out at court. Essentially, I agree to be your legal representation, but I can't make any legal promises to you. That's still going to be up to the discretion of the judge and the jury on the court date. That also being said, it has the typical service provision where you would essentially agree to pay $500 up front and then the hourly rate going forward after that is expended. Also, should that you terminate me as your counsel, that I would retain any payment made up to that point.
Okay.
Does that all sound good to you? Is there any
Sounds-
further questions?
Sounds good and dandy, man.
All right, perfect, Kyle. I just have you sign right there. I've already got your number and your email from the credit card statement. And then I'll be reaching back out with a next meeting. One other note I'd like to get from you is if you did have that next court date for the OWI charge, if you
They
knew.
did not tell me the court date,
Okay.
but I think that definitely I'll get your contact
Yes,
information
we'll
as
just
well.
be in contact.
And
I will be reaching out to you very shortly. And thanks for coming in. I'm sorry to hear that this has happened to you, of course, but we'll do the best that we can to make sure we get this taken care of.
appreciate that. And as well, if you have any clients that need, Salesforce or anything,
Oh, of
I'll
course.
ex-
Yeah.
I'll extend that, because I can always make a little buck. We can make money
Wonderful,
here,
sure.
right? All right, perfect. Are we all good?
Yeah, I think we're all good. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate
Thank
you
so
coming
much.
in.
Oh, no problem.
You've got my number, and we'll be talking to you soon.
No, most definitely. Let me just pack up here real
Oh,
quick.
yes. Sorry.
No, you're good. That's a sick tie, man. That's
Oh, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
whatever.